You are now tuned into the Same Table podcast. I am the host, one of the hosts, Matthew, with my co-host, Deb. Deb, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
That's good.
I've had a really full week.
Have you?
Yeah, but I'm excited to be here at the end of the week.
Well, I'm excited for today's
Me too.
podcast because I
It's a
think
long time coming.
And I think it's going to be very educational,
Yes.
very informative.
A big learning one.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so if you're tuning in just up front, just get your popcorn ready, get your brain ready.
Unlock that mind.
Get your mind ready, get your heart posture right, because this is going to be an exciting journey and conversation today. And joining us at the table, we have Matt and Ji-gaabiikwe.
Yeah.
They represent an organization called iEmergence, and we'll learn more about what that is and what they do and who they are. But we're super excited to have you both on the podcast today.
It's good to be here. Yeah,
Welcome,
great to be here.
welcome.
Thank you.
And so how are you both doing today?
Feeling Ji-gaabiikwe?
I'm doing okay, considering a long day of travel yesterday,
Yeah.
but excited to be here too.
And you're traveling from,
Saskatchewan.
okay, the Sask. I don't know
Yeah.
if they say that, but
No.
They do.
No abbreviation.
Yeah.
I'm coming out from Alberta, from Edmonton. I came in yesterday. Doing well. It's good to be back out in the east.
Nice.
Again, it's where I'm from and where are people from. So it's good to be back out here all the time.
and there's snow out west, I hear.
We did. We started it already, right?
Yeah.
We bring it in the winter.
Condolences.
Yeah, we bring it in the winter.
I hope there's some like force field that doesn't allow them to come east.
Well,
for a
I
while.
arrived here yesterday, straight from the snow, and I go straight to the docks, and it's 20 degrees out.
Yeah, it was
Down-
beautiful
down-
yesterday.
down-
It was
It was just
beautiful
gorgeous,
yesterday.
right? And just sit down there and have
Sure.
a lobster sandwich.
Oh, amazing.
Oh no, it was good.
That's so awesome. Well, we're so happy that you guys are here. Thank you for making the effort to sit down with us and chat. I think for all of us, as we get to know you a bit, we always kind of ask this question as we sit at the same table of all our guests. So would you kind of tell us a bit about your journey? Like, how are you coming to this table? Specifically, maybe particularly from the ethnical and culture lens. And Ji-gaabiikwe, do you want to get us started?
Sure. But first, I would like to introduce myself. This is fairly new on my journey of reclaiming my language. And so trying to speak in the Soto language. So bear with me. So, ani kakana na tanawe maganak, Ji-gaabiikwe na tisnakas, kawing na ganamase do na dodem. Sakwa yalakwil na tonzi, bekwatas okana ka asate kin nataya. Which I said, hello, all my relations. My name is Where the Land and Water Meet Women. I don't know my clan, and I'm from the Yellow Quill First Nation, and I currently live in Regina. I'm a Soto Cree Métis woman from Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan. I'm a 60 scoop survivor, and I'm a mother to a 15-year-old. So that's important for us to say who we are and where we come from. Unfortunately, I don't know my lineage, and that's part of my journey of being a 60 scoop, and so of not knowing my father's family or my mother's family, and that's usually part of our introduction as well. So.
And Ji-gaabiikwe, could you explain what the 60 scoop was?
Yeah.
Just for
Just
people that may
maybe a
not
precursor to
Yeah.
help people to know what to
what that was.
search up and learn more about.
Yeah, so back, I mean, it's in the 60s, but it even happened just prior to. It was more of the tail end of the residential school system where the child welfare organizations pretty much across the country would, whether they apprehend or take Indigenous children. And it was a term used by one of the social workers where he felt he was constantly scooping up Indigenous children. And so they were placed in primarily non-Indigenous foster homes, as well as being adopted to non-Indigenous families across Canada, into the States, even into Europe. And so for myself, being born in Saskatchewan, being scooped when I was about 4 years old, and actually scooped to a family here in Nova Scotia, where I was adopted to a non-Indigenous family. And so there's like, they estimate 20,000, but there's probably more of us because there's a lot that there isn't documentation of that.
Yeah. So you touch upon that you have a connection to the East, that's part of your journey and that story. Could you tell us a little bit more about just kind of how some of those things, that journey, formed you or shaped you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard, painful part of my journey here in the East Coast, and it actually darkened the beauty of the East Coast because of the pain and trauma. And so growing up not really knowing I was Indigenous, but experiencing the racism that came with being different in a community that was primarily white, upper middle class. And so that threw me into, like, in my teens, of just fighting, one, of survival, but as that journey of trying to figure out who I am, especially who I am as an Indigenous woman. And so that journey of understanding what had happened to me, because I didn't know about the 60 Scoop, I didn't know about the residential school until later on in life. But it set me up of how important it was to know where I came from, know my identity, and seeking that out. And so that brought me back out west to learn that. Primarily in Ontario, actually, is where I started reconnecting to my Indigenous roots, or understanding what it means to be Indigenous, especially as an Indigenous woman, because as an Indigenous man, has their own kind of journey and stories. And yeah, like, it's been hard, and even harder as a mom trying to guide my daughter, but it's made me stronger, and to advocate for those that still don't have a voice, or it just lines up to kind of the current the situation of being able to create programs for our young women because of my own experience.
Could you tell us a little bit more about, like, just even, you kind of gave us a little taste of, you know, the shaping that happened, but then how it seems like you kind of landed now in that place. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you do now, and just kind of how you're kind of finding that reconciliation in that sense? Yeah,
because of my own experience, not only reclaiming my indigeneity, but also my journey in faith, kind of all, how just the belief of Creator setting up things for a reason. At the time, not always understanding that, but everything kind of came together. When did I come? 2019. Of really being able to dream and vision of what I felt Creator has placed on my heart to give back to young people, Indigenous youth in particular. Because for me, it's been important for our youth to not look in the mirror and not only like themselves, but love who Creator has created them to be. Because I didn't have that, and I didn't have anybody guiding me that it was okay to be Indigenous, it was okay to look Indigenous. And so in that journey and that's part of, like, even growing my hair now and reclaiming my Indigenous name, all of that stuff leading, that I have to walk the walk, so that our youth can see that it's possible. And so by reclaiming my name, growing my hair, and at times wearing ribbon skirts, because all of that stuff wasn't acceptable, or I guess at a time where it was outlawed, right? It was illegal to be Indigenous. And so with the programs that I'm doing, specifically with our young women, which is called Oski-Squawak, which is Cree for Young Women Helpers, and creating that safe space. Initially, it was a program to provide, like, life skills, like different social skills. But as we came together during these seasonal retreats, we need to heal first. And that's kind of where having to change my vision based on what our youth are needing and are asking for. And realizing that these young women have experienced the intergenerational trauma and haven't had the opportunity or that safe space to even talk about or to understand what that means, because they're the first generations who haven't been scooped or been part of the residential school. And so this generation right now that I'm working with is so important to kind of change and heal so that they don't repeat some of the trauma. Like I know even for myself with my daughter, unintentionally, how she's been scarred with my own trauma. And so then, yeah, just understanding of how important it is to heal and heal in a safe space that allows whatever comes up, because we don't know, like this is all new territory for many of us, but we know that we have to do things different. And so kind of focusing on what the youth are saying, sometimes not verbally, but just, you know, in their actions, and to see them grow in some of those spaces where, you know, when we initially came together like 2 years ago, where they wouldn't talk, they would have their faces covered with their hair or looking down, to where they're wanting to do karaoke and sing, you know, in front of the group, or being able to participate in, you know, other activities outside of our circle. And so seeing our girls come together and support one another, because they know that it's a safe circle, and that despite the chaos in their life, they know that when they come together with us, that it's safe. And that's really, at this time, is important to me. You know, yes, wanting to do social skills, wanting to do independent life skills kind of thing, but to realize how important it is that we heal ourselves inside first before we can start focusing on other skills. Because otherwise you're just putting Band-Aids on things, when I want that inner spirit to be healed and to be okay with themselves, because there's too many of our young people who aren't surviving. And if it's just those moments, those brief moments where they feel loved or cared for, then what I'm doing is good.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I love in your story just the power of redemption, how Creator can take, you know, the brokenness of our own stories and use that as a place of compassion and ultimately service to others who might share in their own traumatic experience, or just a way to bring peace and hope through pain, which, you know, pain has a great unifying effect as human beings. But thank you for sharing that, and let's bring Matt to the table, and so Matt, would you share with us just a little bit of your journey of coming up? I know you have been very involved in iEmergence and Indigenous Pathways, and just, I would say, just a leader in many ways in the Indigenous community. And so just share a little bit with us about your journey, what you're doing, some of the things in which you had to reconcile your own mind in terms of just faith and being an Indigenous person, and how that all just reconciles and kind of shapes the way you serve and do what you do. And so, share with us.
Sweet. Well, Kwe, bonjour. Hello. Thank you, Matthew, Deborah, for just this invitation. So my name is Matthew James Gwilym Wuchuosin Leblanc. I am of mixed ancestry. I am Mi'kmaq, French, and Scottish. A reserve we connect to is in Listagouche First Nation from my father's side, and where my grandpa grew up. And then our family roots in and connects to our communities on Prince Edward Island now, Abikwit First Nation. I didn't grow up there. Yeah. I was born in Manitoba, actually, and that's where my mother is from. Farm out in Manitoba, and so my dad had moved from out east and met my mom out there, and that's where we grew up as a family. And we didn't grow up really connected to much culture or tradition. We were farmers. We engaged in the whole farming thing, right? We raised horses. My mom and dad were horse trainers, and grew up on the backs of horses. It wasn't until a little later on in my young life that, and as a family, we started to connect and explore a little bit more about what our cultural background is, and focusing a lot on just the Mi'kmaq side and just the side that had been repressed, oppressed, and held down, and that was a way of reconnecting some identity that had been lost in our family and in our community, and reconnecting with some of our the ancestors that had struggled through that specific identity, and saying, what does it mean to be Mi'kmaq? What does it mean to be Indigenous? So started that journey kind of as a teen, and a big part of that journey was traveling and having an opportunity to sit amongst Indigenous peoples globally. So for me, my journey didn't really start here in Canada in that discovery as much as it did globally. So back in 1996, I was able to attend a gathering that had just begun. It was a vision of Monty and Linda Ohia from New Zealand, Maori couple, that had this vision, said, what would it look like for Indigenous peoples around the world to gather and to come together to explore common questions and common realities that we're experiencing globally as Indigenous peoples, experiences of colonization, of colonial oppression or rule, and loss of land and culture and tradition and language, and what would it mean to come together and have those conversations as a global Indigenous community? Where can we find the connections and so forth? So as a young man, I was traveled to New Zealand to experience this gathering, which was extremely impactful and important in my journey, in my rediscovery of myself, or discovery of myself. I guess I didn't know it before, right? Just young. And I'm not going to go into ages or anything because we're not going to date ourselves here. But that gathering impacted me greatly. And it started us, me and the other young people and families that were a part of that gathering on a kind of trajectory, on this journey of continuing to explore not just our own unique identities, but how that connects to Indigenous community globally, and this commonality, this story that brings us together as peoples. It asked us to question ourselves, say, wait, I'm responsible to explore for myself who I am, my identity, and bring forward, bring back to the surface all that powerful knowledge and understanding that Creator had placed in our peoples, and bring that back to the surface, restore it, reclaim it, and be proud of it. Like Ji-gaabiikwe was saying, is not just to kind of like ourselves, but to begin to love all of the unique ways in which we are as community and as people, through language, ceremony, traditions, as well as our understanding of our place in the universe as the human species, as the human beings that are a part of this wider universe and on Earth. So that gathering was called the World Christian Gathering on Indigenous Peoples, WCGIP, and it was held every 2 years, hosted by different Indigenous peoples around the world. Started in 1996 in New Zealand. 98 was in the U.S., hosted by my family and another family, the Twist family, as the kind of the directors or the organizers of it. In 2000, it was held in Australia. 2002 in Hawaii. 2005, it was hosted by the Sami people of Sweden, Norway, Finland, Russia. In 2006 in the Philippines. 2008 was in Israel, and then it ended in 2011 back in New Zealand as a kind of a coming around full circle. During this gathering, being a young person, grew up in this. So traveling to all these places and sitting amongst Indigenous elders and peoples and listening to the stories, listening to the knowledge that was there, and starting to be challenged by those things about, okay, well, how do I tell my story? What is my story? How does that story impact who I need to be in this world, but also impact what I need to be what I need to be doing. And so a lot of us young people, that were a part of that gathering, started to ask ourselves some questions about our role in our generation to continue these conversations. The original question of the World Christian Gathering, as you know, my parents' generation was asking, was the ideas around what does it mean to be Indigenous, authentically Indigenous, as well as authentic followers of the Jesus way. Again, as a Christian gathering, this was their question. And it was a question that had been denied any answer for so many generations, as we talked about residential school systems here in Canada, across the US, but systems like that have occurred across the globe in Indigenous community, where being Indigenous, whether sometimes illegal to be Indigenous, or thought of as subhuman or not human, as in Australia, the Aboriginal community there, of being classified more under the Flora and the Fauna Act than Human Rights Acts. So those kinds of ideas, and saying, they're like, well, what does it mean to be authentically that, but authentic followers of what they thought of it, you know, they understood as a religion or a teaching, Jesus' teaching, that had been brought in a colonial sense, that had been forced down people's throats as a antithesis or an opposite of being Indigenous. And so their question was like, can we be both of those? And that was important to them as that generation, because they'd been suffering through that. Yeah. We didn't, as our generation, suffer through that as much, because we grew up in that sense where those questions were being asked, and our generation, we're going through different questions and different ideas and different thoughts about what it meant to be Indigenous in our current context, in this generation, as we struggle with things like climate change, and we struggle with large questions about what it is to be human in a good way, connected to the rest of creation. And so as young people growing up in that gathering, we started to ask some of those questions about what does it mean to be creating spaces that allow Indigenous peoples to begin to, or to continue to be self-directive and self-determining in their own development. What does it mean to once again take back our own trajectory of development, and redefine that back into what we traditionally understood as development, this idea of sustainability with all of creation, this idea of being one, being in unison with creation, and not seeing either one way of believing or one idea of development as an only way, but seeing as like together we bring ideas and thoughts as a global community that we need to form up and listen to each other and collaborate and be that. So during that gathering, iEmergence, the organization that we work with, was birthed. The idea of, in our generation, how do we create spaces for Indigenous peoples to come and gather? We had been able to experience that through the World Christian Gathering on Indigenous peoples, and we felt very privileged to be able to do that. Not everyone can access spaces like that, or there aren't spaces like that in community. And so iEmergence, our first idea was, how do we create more of those spaces? How do we create spaces locally for that? How do we create spaces intergenerationally for that, where youth are able to have a space to feel safe, secure, to explore what it means to be Indigenous for them, without someone telling them what that means, without the someone coming and saying, well, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to believe, this is who you have to be. And it's like, no, what does it mean for us to explore that and to create spaces to explore that together? What does it mean for our elders to once again take the space of being elders, honored with knowledge and wisdom, and to share that in a space that is respectful and encourages that connection of the old wisdom and knowledge to come into the next generations, and then that generation to take that and process it, and then decide how they need to be using it into the generation that they're living into. So that was really what iEmergence was developed and designed to do, is create spaces for that. And in the development of that, it was turned into some specifics of, cultural gatherings, camps, sustainable development initiatives, educational initiatives, to bring back traditional knowledge systems and practices and try to integrate them more into our regular life, as well as into the mainstream as well. It also took on the idea of what does intercultural relationships or cross-cultural relationships look like. As Indigenous peoples, we live in lands that have been colonized. Other people live in these lands. That was never a bad thing, right? Having other people around it's not a bad thing. It's how you live together in the same house that becomes the question, right? How do you share the space together in good ways? And so exploring what it means for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples to live in the space well together. So a lot of our spaces were cross-cultural, intercultural, non-Indigenous and Indigenous, and helping the non-Indigenous to listen to the stories and the history that perhaps they'd never heard before. And not necessarily perhaps, like they probably haven't heard most of it before. Our education system hasn't been great in delivering the full story of either Canada or the US or any of those spaces. And so what does it mean for us to re-educate by opening up spaces where people can listen and learn and maybe be challenged to see their neighbors in a different way and relate in a different way. And so this is where iEmergence started to create those spaces, develop the relationships and the partnerships globally. Here in Canada, we have, as Ji-gaabiikwe was saying, she's been developing and running Moccasin Lodge. I don't know if you mentioned Moccasin Lodge yet.
No, I didn't.
You're going to talk about that later, though. So I'm mentioning it first, but then she's going to explore that a little bit. But exploring different spaces like that across Canada about relationships in community and in urban context as well. What does that look like? So that's a bit about me.
Yeah.
A little rambly. But
no, it's good.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
We like rambly. We like some good riffs.
Just
on
riffs,
the
rambly, just
man,
taking off on a.
Hey, just play that chord. Just play that chord, man.
I don't know if that was the pocket yet, but we're gonna get there.
I know we're getting there. Well, thanks for sharing, Matt. I'm curious. You were talking about the questions that your father's generation was asking around how faith, culture kind of intersects and how that's reconciled, and having space to explore that. And you said kind of each generation's asking different questions. And so in your journey, specifically around your kind of version, reconciling those ideas of being Indigenous, being a follower of Christ, how has that journey been for you specifically?
And different questions, different generations. That was a struggle for my parents' generation as they were brought into the Christian church and indoctrinated into Christian doctrine and tradition while being told specifically, leave your culture out of this. It's at best neutral and useless. At worst, it's evil. It's devils. It's all that. And so that was a big struggle for them. My generation, or me, or the community that I was engaged in with the World Christian Gathering and so forth and so on, that wasn't a question to us. We almost didn't care. Like it wasn't like we can believe what we want. We can do it. We don't need to question whether we can or we can't. But can we do this and this? Well, of course we can. Like it's obvious. What our question was more on is being Indigenous and embracing that in its fullness. That added some questions about, wait, all this stuff that's been taught to us from these other religions, right? And again, I say other religions because it's in iEmergence, Indigenous emergence. We have engaged with Indigenous peoples all over the world. And so sometimes the colonial religion isn't necessarily Christian. Some of the places, sometimes Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism or other things that have come in and become a dominant belief system amongst Indigenous peoples around the world. But as we reclaim and explore our own tradition and our own understandings of Creator, the teachings that Creator gave to our peoples uniquely, and the ways in which those teachings, those initial instructions, some people might say, from the Creator, and how those initial instructions taught us how to live on the earth in good ways, as good human beings, as good two-leggeds amongst the four-leggeds and the swimmers and the flyers and all of those kind of things. Those teachings sometimes were at odds with a lot of what we were taught with these other religions coming in. It's like, wait, there are some serious questions I have about what are these other religions asking us to do or believe that are counter or against those original instructions that Creator gave our people of how to live in good ways, whether that's in, like I was mentioning before, in environmental ways, like straight up, like how do we relate to our brothers and sisters that are the four-leggeds and the flyers and the swimmers and the land itself, our ancestor, from dirt from which we came, right? This is our ancestor. This is someone that is us. How do we relate to our mother, the earth? And these questions were like, actually, there's really value in understanding our belief systems and not raising one above the other. Saying, how do we learn through all of these stories? And like I was saying earlier, it's like coming together with our unique understandings of the world and of faith and of Creator and all that stuff. How do we come together and learn from each other? Reinforce those things that are really good and important in each of our traditions, even if they're different. And it's okay to be different.
Yeah.
We don't have to be the same. I think we were talking about this in an early conversation.
Sure.
It's about unity, not
uniformity. Yes,
right.
I'm with you.
We don't want to be the same.
Preach that.
Yeah, right. We want to be together in all this and have relationship and good relationship. But I can be different than you, and I can believe different things than you. I don't have to believe the exact same things as you for us to be friends, to work together, and to encourage each other, challenge each other, and to live well on the earth together. This is important, and this is a big thing in my journey personally of understanding Creator and faith and so forth. And as I've traveled globally around the world and lived amongst Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples globally, is seeing all these perspectives and these understandings and these ways in which we express our faith as unique, different, but not bad or good or whatever, just different. Right? That hold unique understandings or unique expressions. And so my journey of faith is like, well, actually there's probably we put Creator in a little box when we say that our religion or our way of understanding the Creator is the only way, and everyone must think that. Creator isn't in a box, and we put Creator there all the time when we do that. And so there's just this vast understanding that we miss out on when we don't. So my journey has been, how do I explore those understandings? How do I learn from people different than me that are thinking differently than me, and incorporate that or allow that to challenge my understanding constantly.
Gotcha. Well, that's good. Have you experienced any? You were talking about some of those barriers in the previous generations around, let's say, the more majority church or culture demonizing Indigenous culture, and some of even just the question of can those two identities coexist?
Right.
Have you had any different pushback from the church or the majority culture in terms of the questions that you have been wrestling through, and kind of what you just described as the culture try to push back and say in similar but different way about how you can be both Indigenous and have a faith understanding? Have you had any types of like just deliberate pushback against that?
Lots from again the Christian church, specifically here in Canada, and also from our own community. Right, from Indigenous community that has sick and tired of other religion coming in and saying, well, you can't be a traditional person and follow this Christian thing either. And then, but a lot from the Christian church saying, that's you're being synchronistic, you're, all those kind of, and I'm like, sure. Follow your own Christian history, your own Christian tradition. Every tradition that's involved in the church
syncretist in some form
has been pulled in from another
that's why I don't like that.
Another background.
I don't get that critique.
It's just it's a horrible critique.
I know, because there's a lot of parallels with the Black and African experience. Very similar in that way. And I'm like, do you not see all this Eurocentric culture and Christianity that you're following? But they don't have that same syncretistic.
Well, because the Christian church has embraced those traditions as Christian traditions, and it became this is Christian culture.
That becomes a normative.
It's a normative
water
thing,
we
right?
swim in. So it's like, what's water?
And the idea that there's like a culture that is Christian is a huge fallacy. It's just it's ridiculous to think. Again, if you're swimming in the Christian waters, it's a ridiculous thing to think of. as you're saying, like pushback and all that. So a lot of the pushback is around that.
Yeah.
And or pushback against traditional teachings that don't talk about religion in the same terms. Yeah. Don't use the same words. Don't use perhaps even the name Jesus to understand who Creator is and how Creator interacted with our peoples to teach us the ways of being good humans. And so for many other people, like, they don't need to use those words. Same ideas, the same concepts, the same understandings exist in cultures and traditions, but the words are different, and the ways of understanding and describing them or expressing them are different. And so people get hung up on saying, well, no, you have to say these words. You have to say it this way, or it doesn't mean it. And that's more for them than for anyone else, because they need to be reaffirmed that what they know and how they think about it and say it is right.
That's a good point.
It's not about me. It's about them being reaffirmed in that. I'm right, I'm good, I'm righteous, I'm saved, whatever that means. Yeah. It's a reaffirmation for them when other people accept that. I don't think that we should be pursuing that so much. That's not the goal. And so that's
because I think I remember when we chatted before in prep for this podcast. I think I was like, oh, can you explain, like, this word, is this the equivalent of like the language I understand to describe my faith? And you were like, no,
maybe not.
So can you, you taught me. So, could you share a little bit more, even Ji-gaabiikwe, if you want to jump in, just like, I think you touched on that just even now, that people want a reaffirmation of the words they know. So, yeah.
And there are things that are not translatable. Like, you can just go straight up language, never mind religion and all that stuff, but even language. Like, there are words in languages, you would understand that, right? You can't translate to English, or like, it just doesn't work. The meaning is lost somehow in that translation. You can get an idea of it. You might kind of describe around it so people get a little bit of a feeling. Same way in these kind of doctrines or religious concepts and ideas, is that there isn't always a one-to-one relating. Be like, you can say it's kind of like this. You might understand it a little bit in your belief system. It might be a similar thing to this. You could say that in many cases, but to both assume that is necessary and demand that my belief system is validated through your understanding is, I think, wrong. And it is a difficulty that we continue to experience in our world today. Especially, again, when we talk about Christian and the Christian colonial experience of Indigenous peoples here, is that maybe there's some acceptance of some indigeneity coming into the church, or some indigenous expression coming into the church, whether that be just music or maybe even some teachings. But it always needs to be validated through the Christian lens, right? Or
like
the biblical lens.
The filter.
The filter is someone else.
But even that specific church communities.
Right.
It's like, but yeah.
And like, how dare you force me to be valid because you say I'm valid through your teachings or your whatever. No, I'm valid because I am. My culture, my tradition is valid because it is. The Creator gave me that and all that. So it's that kind of thing. Like, even if we can translate a little bit and help people understand.
Sure. It's a little like this.
It's a little like this, and that's good. And it's helpful to have cross-cultural relations, to understand each other. Yeah. But it isn't necessary for my validation, right? It's valid because it's valid, whether you think it is or not. That kind of idea.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. You guys kind of touched on it a little bit, shared a bit. I'd love to kind of unpack a little bit more, just what's been your faith journey? Maybe we've mentioned it. I'd love to share. Ji-gaabiikwe, do you want to start us off? Like, could you tell us a little bit more about, like, your story, but your faith journey is another layer to that story?
Yeah, like my journey is definitely different than Matt's because it started primarily of reclaiming my indigeneity. And in that was then the understanding of the residential school with the harms done by the various churches. And so I wouldn't have considered myself religious or traditional in any way, and stayed away from church people, or more of the like the preachy church people.
Gotcha.
I had a lot of colleagues and friends who were Christians, but not really, the preachy type. And so, but when my daughter was 3, she asked me about God. And that was not like in my, like our world view. And so I was quite surprised because she's never heard God come out of my mouth or really around the people that we hung out with. And so it was a surprise when she asked that. And so I wasn't sure where to go with that. But I also had done a lot of healing. And so it was like, okay, I want her, whatever path that she is going to take, I want to support her. I don't have to believe in it, but I definitely want her to have doors open, and then she can kind of choose and decide that. And so I asked around some of my preachy folks, of like, where's a good church? Because at the time we were living in Barrie, Ontario, and so there was a church that was out of the movie theater. So I'm like, oh, it's not like an actual church building. That seems to be a bit safer.
Yeah, church in the movie theater is fun.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, that's exciting.
Smell of popcorn.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We did a baptism in movie theaters. Actually, Deepwater started in a movie theater.
Yeah.
I used to attend a church that was in a bar or something. It's
Okay.
good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, God's everywhere. He's omnipresent. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so it was less threatening for me, right?
Yeah,
and I
for
think
sure.
that really helped open that door for myself. But I didn't entirely understand what the whole, when you go to church, what happens. So, dropping my daughter off at the children's ministry, and then the adults go into the theater.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, now I'm being sucked in, having to listen while I'm waiting for my daughter. But it happened to be, they were connected with, I can't even remember the name, but with Andy Stanley.
Okay.
And so he was doing the sermon about decision making. And it was definitely not what I thought church was.
Yeah.
And so then, after a while listening to him, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, because what he was talking about, it wasn't really like churchy, preachy stuff, but more of like things how I can relate to my life. And so I think that really helped soften that walk for me. But then when we went into, the small groups, and that's when things were like, oh my gosh, like what am I getting myself into? And so that's where, again, experiencing harm from the church because of just questions, right? And so it wasn't a safe place to explore or to ask, like, just, is there really a God? Like, really, what is, like questioning things in the Bible. And so we ended up walking away, or I ended up walking away because I was just like, okay, if you can't ask questions, even though they say you can ask questions, you can't really ask questions.
Not those questions.
Just not those questions.
Yeah, not those
Here's the
questions.
approved list of questions.
You could say it this way.
Right? And so then it was just like, oh my goodness. And so when we moved back to Saskatchewan, we were probably there a year, and then Kennedy asked again, like, can I go to church? And so trying to find a church that had a good children's ministry. Because it was important to her, not so much about like necessarily for me. I wanted her that she supported. And so we ended up moving across from where this church. And that's kind of the start of my really faith journey that was separate from my daughter's. But it was her that initially got me on that path. And so kind of looking back because even getting pregnant, the pregnancy, I shouldn't have. And so a lot of those things, when I look back of how Creator had put things already in motion, that I wasn't going to listen to anybody else but my daughter. And so of having my daughter open that door for me to be able to trust. And so that's like, for me, that's the integral piece of it is because I think without her, I don't think I would be where I am. And so then it was, just journeying along with her, but also for myself and understanding and exploring what, who Jesus was, God or creator. But again, experiencing my authentic self as an Indigenous person kind of collided. And so I was faced with people of faith saying I couldn't be Indigenous.
Which blows my mind. Like, you can't not be...
It's
like someone telling me to stop being Chinese.
So my former pastor, so I was water baptized, and so I'm like, what did you expect? I went in as an Indigenous woman into the water, and I came out, guess what? As an Indigenous woman.
Oh no, that washed it all away.
Right? Like, and so, like that still blows me away, like those conversations, and I didn't understand, but I spiraled, not in a negative way, but of just like leaning into God, leaning into Creator. I was like, okay, I didn't come this far. You didn't bring me this far for me to deny who you created me to be. Because at the time I had worked for an organization which really, really challenged. It was a Christian organization, and so that really challenged what I was doing and what path Creator had me on, and so then reaching out to anybody of like, I can't be alone in experiencing this, because I felt so isolated, because many like Indigenous people that I knew, you couldn't publicly say that you were going to church or believing in Creator because of the history. And so I wasn't feeling supported even with people that I knew. And then the Christians that I knew wasn't feeling supported either. And so then I ended up seeking support, and that opened the door to this Indigenous learning community of other followers who were authentic in their indigeneity. But I was still trying to figure out, and I'm still trying to figure out what that means, because it's still, depending on where you are on the land, like it's like people always want you to be somebody, and so they're comfortable, so they're validated in who they are, and it's just like, why can't you just accept me? Accept the space in our differences.
It's hard to break that assimilation spirit.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, man.
Because it's that constant of being colonized over and over, right, in different spaces. And but again, like for my daughter, like she knew she was a daughter of Christ. She knew that she was Indigenous, and she's never had to ask those questions. She's always known, but she's witnessed my suffering in trying to understand that. And so for me, it's been important for the spaces that I create, that our youth, our families just come in and we accept them for where they're at. And for them to start exploring what does that mean for them. But for myself, it's more important for them to like themselves as Indigenous people before even entering into those conversations about their journey, because we have not been seen as humans, humans that are deserving of Christ's love, right? To be ourselves without having to talk like them, walk like them, look like them. And so for me, I struggle with when people are wanting me, and this is where we kind of talk about the Christianese, right? Because it minimizes my experience, my understanding of the teachings that I'm learning. But also, because of colonization, I've lost some of those teachings. And so trying to also reclaim those teachings and understanding of who Creator was, and the values and our traditional ways of how we lived on this land. Because, Creator, we we're here. We've been here for thousands and thousands of years. And that there is a reason why some of our creation stories are the way they are, and how we live on this land, share, with all of creation. Whereas when you look at the European Western ways of thinking, it was more individualistic, right? And so there isn't, when I look there, it's like, well, you're detaching from actually creator. And so that's kind of just as I'm continuing trying to unpack, but more of like sometimes feeling I have to defend my belief, even though like there is one creator. We all came from the earth, but there's that disconnect from the Western way of moving away from all of creation.
Yeah.
Right. So it's,
as you were sharing, I was thinking about, because I have a similar journey in coming from the African Nova Scotia community. There's definitely some parallel. Again, reconciling your culture, our version of being Indigenous in that sense, with faith. And I would say a number of years ago, I kind of came to this conclusion. I use my mantra is that I'm unashamedly a follower of Christ, but I'm also unapologetically African Nova Scotian. And it works for me great.
You can do both.
Yeah.
Right? Again, that's the thing about journeys. Like, that's good.
Yeah, it is.
You have that identity that you said, this is me.
Yeah.
And that's good. Someone else might have a different identity. And they're like, actually, I'm traditional, straight up. Is that okay? Yeah, it should be. And that should be okay. And this is where we get to, like you were saying about, we've been baptized, and someone said, you're going to go in Indigenous, you're going to come out non-Indigenous. Sort of. But people confuse what it being a culture is. Culture isn't, like I just say, I'm Canadian. It's not necessarily a culture, it's citizenship. There are many cultures in Canada, and a culture doesn't just say, I'm Mi'kmaq or I'm French. It says, what does that mean? It's all the things that make up that culture. So it's language, it's tradition, it's ceremony, that's what it means to be that. And so when you're saying, as I say, people don't expect you to not be Chinese, because you're going to be Chinese, but perhaps they expect you to give up all the things that mean
100%.
being Chinese.
That assimilation spirit's
right?
strong, right?
Right? So that's what they mean by that, and that's the difficulty.
Yeah.
And this is why we talk about the cultural genocide in Canada. Is like eventually, after they decided not to kill everyone or try to kill everyone, they're like, oh, we'll just kill everything inside of you, right? And this is that genocide, that cultural genocide that happens constantly in a colonial effort or in a religious missional effort, right? It's like, we're going to kill everything inside of you. You can be you can bring a couple things with you, but leave everything else. And this is the difficulty that we encounter.
Which doesn't reflect like God's heart, right? Like he created culture, he created ethnicity, and he created us to live in fullness of those things. And I think, sometimes we're so blind to where that spirit comes from. Like, what is at the heart of that? And is that truly a reflection of who God is? Or is it really more of a reflection of something specific that's tied to a specific way of thinking?
Yeah, a lot of it is. And fear.
Yep.
Needing to be, again, reaffirmed.
Yeah.
To feel like the way I know it is the right way. But a lot of it's fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the difference.
Fear of getting it wrong.
Getting it wrong.
Well, and I find, like, with my understanding anyways, the Western Christian church, like, they separate the religion to the person. And so with Indigenous ways of being, doing, and knowing, it's all encompassing. Like, you can't separate.
It's holistic.
Like, you can't separate, this is my faith practice from my culture, because it's all interconnected and interweaved into who we are as Indigenous people.
Being human. In my context, in my culture, this is what it means to be human.
Because I've had people say, we'll have this conversation, but separate yourself from your indigeneity. And I'm like, oh, so you want me to just like rip me to pieces in order to be at this table? Like, it's some of the conversations have, I mean, it's been harmful and painful, but it's also ridiculous.
You know, I think I've shared this before in different settings, but I think it's a worthwhile exploration, no matter if you're of the majority culture and, like, for example, whiteness is just normative, to explore not the racial understanding, but more of the ethnic and cultural. Like, okay, you're white. What does that mean? Is that Scottish? Is that Irish? Is that English? And where does your lineage come? Like, start to unpack that and see yourself. To me, that's more of the fullness of your humanity, not a social construct such as race that really is designed to stratify and create disparity between us and in division. But to actually go on the journey of, like, well, who am I? Because I think when you do that, you're much more empathetic, compassionate, sympathetic to others who are also on that journey.
You acknowledge it exists in yourself.
Yeah,
so
if
you
it
can
exists
acknowledge
in you, you can relate.
In someone else.
You can relate. And that was one of the powerful things with, again, the gathering I was talking about, the World Christian Gathering, was that there was a lot of isolation of Indigenous community around the world, the feeling they were going through the struggle alone. Similar to how Ji-gaabiikwe was saying, it was like, I was feeling isolated. In our communities around the world, there was isolation. It was like, we're struggling in this effort to be ourselves while being inundated with colonial and missional efforts and all this kind of stuff. But the gathering brought us to a space where actually there are other people that, we're on this journey. Oh, you're on this journey too. Oh, that's great. Maybe we could journey together. Maybe together we can discover some ways of journeying. Not necessarily the answers, but maybe some process that we could go through. And maybe we take that process, which has happened out of that gathering. This is where iEmergence came out of. It's where so many different initiatives came out of, is this gathering where people went back to their country and said, we can use this process, these ways of thinking now to have some conversations in our own community and maybe encourage our own community in this journey of rediscovery and reclaiming ourselves, our faith, our traditions, and so forth. And so I think asking people, not just to, like, it'd be great if people can go back and say, oh, my Scottish heritage, what does that look like? Oh, my French heritage. Not everyone can do that. Some places are just really super disconnected. I was having good conversation with some friends when I was in South Africa about the Afrikaans community, and many of my friends there say, it's great, I love when you go back in your history and can tell your ancestors and like stuff. I can't. Like, my grandpa is the farthest I can go back that we know about. I was like, I get that.
And there be definitely parallels with that here as African Nova
It's like, I can't go back any further.
And that's the grief of it too.
There's a big grief, but then there's a collective kind of historical reality that you can be a part of.
For sure.
Saying what was before that in general, in collective. Maybe not personally. Maybe I can't track my ancestors specifically name for name back, but collectively, what did my culture, my community look like going back, and collectively, what was my journey or exploration in the world as my people and whatnot and so forth. And I think that's helpful. As you said, there's when you're on the common path together, you relate brother to brother, sister to sister, grandpa to grandpa, and all the relations, as you say, all our relations, you can relate as one because you recognize the common journey that we're on. Which is good, or the common table that we sit around.
This is it
in this space, right?
Same table,
right? Same table. Just thought I'd bring it back around.
Yeah, that's good, man. Yeah, that's good. That's a good summation.
Yeah, Matt, did you want to touch a little bit about your faith journey in particular? I think you've kind of shared it in lots of pieces. I don't know if there's anything.
Yeah, there's lots of pieces there.
Yeah, you want to give us a little thread?
A little thread summation. Yeah. I'm not sure. Like my faith journey has been attached to my, life journey. Of I've traveled a lot. I've explored global Indigenous communities that have invited me and welcomed me in as a brat kid sometime that needed some correction. So they brought me in and I was like, you can live with us and we're gonna
smack you around.
We're gonna help you understand some things that you need to understand. But giving me the space and the just the grace to be able to do that in some ways.
It's a good word.
Teaching me along the way. I've been welcomed into some pretty amazing families around the world and communities around the world that took me as I was, not necessarily all great, but took me as I was and helped to shape and mold me through their traditional understandings of what it meant to be a good human, challenging me to do that. So for me, that's my faith journey, is learning what it means to be authentically me, right? And I think if we could explore that a lot more as humans, not what does it mean to be the best part of this religion or that religion or whatever. What does it mean to be the best human, the best me, the person that can respect and honor others, can bring love to every situation and grace, to bring understanding. Whether you want it in the Christian tradition of like your 1 Corinthians 13, where you talk about the I think it's 1 Corinthians 13.
The love poem?
The love poem kind of thing is like, love is this, love is that. This is what it means to be good. Or whether you talk about the 7 sacred teachings, across Canada, and that talk about what does it mean to love and have courage and to, speak truth and be honest. And if we can sit in those things and understand those things first, we will express our so-called belief systems and religion in authentic ways, because we're doing what it means to be good humans first. And I think that's what all of these things are trying to talk to us about. And all of the teachings around the world, again, in my journey, when you boil it down, they're all trying to help us to be the best humans we can be. And that's the kind of the point, is how do we be authentically these Homo sapiens, these humans amongst all of creation, to do that in a good way, to do that in an honoring way. So for me, that's been a lot of my faith journey, is like, how do I reduce that down to not all the doctrines that come out of some of those things, dogmas that sit within a lot of those, but what are some root things that I can ask myself in every situation? In this situation, how do I be loving? In this situation, how do I be honest? How do I be truthful in what I'm doing? If I can ask myself those questions, that's living out faith, living out my journey of being authentic. And to honoring Creator for who Creator made me in this space, and so that's a lot of me in my faith journey. I don't attach a lot of terms and words and religious ideologies to it as much, but I sit amongst them, and I think there's lots we can learn from those.
So maybe to help us wrap up here, what are some things that I'm curious from your perspective? For we've got listeners that I hope Indigenous people are listening, and there's definitely non-Indigenous people that will be listening to your stories and this conversation. So what are some things that you want to encourage them, exhort them with? Just want to give you guys a chance to not just Matthew, but like the listeners.
Teach the people.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, it's and my experience is making sure that people are either reading or listening to Indigenous people, and to be open to their truth, because like I facilitate the blanket exercise, and so sometimes that's the first where people start hearing about, I guess, what's known as Canada, the truth behind Canada and Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and the impact of what colonization has done, and to really educate, but also to sit in that discomfort of knowing their ancestors of that we're part of. I don't know how to say, like, because I always like Canada is built on the blood of Indigenous people, and so being open to that and what does that mean, and the impact of the current Indigenous people that are living on this land and their circumstances. And so when you see an Indigenous person, and I mean, and as Christ followers, right, like to love one another, but to see what's their story, why are they in some situations, why are they in pain, and what's behind that, or their circumstances, right? And to move away from the stereotypes and the myths that they understand, because that's what's causing a lot of harm. Or people are like, well, because they sit on the non-truth, right? And whether through the education system wasn't helpful, but also through churches hasn't been helpful, because many churches still, I don't say preach, but they still teach that Indigenous people and their practices are not of God, right? And so then that continues to and just to start questioning. And that's the biggest thing, is questioning their teachings or what their learnings. And so hearing from Indigenous people and sitting in their truth, I think is, from what I'm witnessing and from what I'm in conversations with people, it's hard. It's hard to sit in that discomfort, because people, regardless, right? Like, you don't want to sit and you don't want to listen, or you don't want to hear somebody's pain, but sometimes you need to in order to move forward and to reframe what you've learned. And that's hard, to let go of, this is what you grew up with, and then having to to unpack all of that and break that apart is like, oh, that's actually not true, what I've thought to be. Because we've been in the discomfort. We've been in that pain, because I stopped trying to say or be in order for other people to be comfortable, right? This is who I am. If you're uncomfortable, then you need to look and you need to explore why. Because if I'm okay with sitting across from you, then why aren't you comfortable sitting across from me? Or why do I have to be somebody in order for you to be comfortable, or for us to share a coffee, to share a table? Because we shouldn't have to adapt or adjust for other people. And that's the thing, is like, we are who we are. If we all believe that Creator created us, then we should be able to just to share a meal together. But there's many people who aren't comfortable in that, and that's not my problem, right? And that's a lot of it. It's not my problem. And so that's kind of where people need to step in and lean into that discomfort and really question what is going on internally and where did that come from, and not to be ashamed or feel guilty about it, but they may experience that, but why?
Own it. Acknowledge it.
Yeah, I think that's good. Encouragements. We talked about this when we were discussing earlier. It's the idea of asking questions, of not being, and I think you said it quite well, Ji-gaabiikwe, is to continuously ask the why questions. My journey, my faith journey, my life journey, journey of traveling, all that stuff, it's something that I tried to always remind myself to do everywhere I went. I was like, well, why do I believe that? Where did that come from? What kind of perhaps I don't want to say indoctrination. Well, where did that come from as a young person growing up in a specific place with specific people with perhaps a specific religious background? Where did those ideas come in me? And go back a little bit and understand the foundations of what we believe and why, whether that be religious or societal. How our society lives, breathes, works, economic. It doesn't matter what it is, but to be able to walk that back and say, well, why do I think those things? What are the foundational teachings on that, and were they good in the beginning? Like sometimes the pillars that we build our identities on, they're actually rotten at the bottom. Again, if you want to go biblically, you can talk about that. Building on sand, building on and all those kind of things. Like we build on some pretty sandy spaces sometimes, not understanding that.
I like that, sandy spaces.
Yeah, right.
That'll preach.
I'm not a preacher per se.
I know, but that alliteration.
Alliteration, you gotta love that alliteration.
I'm making a note. You building on sandy spaces.
You can take that. It's all yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Trademark Matt LeBlanc.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, a little subtext. No, we understand, but that's what makes it hard for people. Is that we build identities on these pillars, that religious pillars, or that make our identity up, and to start to question those, or when people challenge those, it challenges our very identities, as within our religious spaces, and we got to be okay with that. One thing that I've said many times when talking with churches, or they always question me about my religious ceremony of like, well, is that of God? Is that? And I was like, okay, I don't mind that. I can put that on the table, open hand, and we can talk about whether they are or they aren't, as long as you're willing to do the same with your Christian beliefs. You have to put all of the things that you hold dear as being true and right as a Christian on the table, just like you're asking me to do, and we'll talk about it. And we'll actually explore it. And we'll go back to the history of it and where it came from and why it's done and all those kind of things. If you're willing to do that, that's great. We can have an honest conversation. But not if you're just going to sit and question me about mine without being vulnerable about yours.
Yeah.
Like, this is same table.
Yeah, I love that.
Put this stuff on the table,
Put it
and we'll
on.
have an honest conversation about it, and we'll explore it. And together we'll probably learn a lot more. But don't ask me to do it without being willing to do it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that we always, as Indigenous people, we always have to sacrifice part of ourselves or be vulnerable in these conversations. It's like, at what point, why is it always about us? That we're giving up something. And I mean, this is our lived experience. And I'm okay because the path that Creator has me on of stepping into those gaps and kind of being that bridge. But there's people who aren't, strong enough, but yet they're put into those places of having to give up a piece of ourselves, but it's not returned.
Yeah.
So we gotta be honest, authentic, open with each other.
That's powerful.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for taking time and sharing your story in a very open way and inviting us in to both listen and learn. I mean, I'm taking away a lot. Even when we did our pre-interview conversation, I kind of like walked away from that, and I was uncomfortable for like a solid week. I was just like, oh man, like I don't know. And I called Matthew, and I was like, Matthew, I'm uncomfortable. Just I think just me being vulnerable back, so that you guys, I just appreciate the ways that you guys have invited us into a space of consideration of. And I think back to something that Danny said in season 1, where he talked about when we build our foundations on sandy spaces, but if we built it on something solid, we shouldn't be afraid to question. We shouldn't be afraid to open that and consider, because if it was on something solid, it'll still stand.
It'll stand.
And I think that's been helpful, because sometimes in this conversation it can just be like you just leave with a lot of discomfort and you don't know what to do with it. But I think it's good to explore, and maybe our listeners are feeling that a little bit. That's okay. Yeah. I'm right there with them. I've experienced it. Matthew and I identified between the two of us. We're like, this one's gonna be this
is part of just working interculturally. Be willing, not even just interculturally, as a human. It's growth happens in places of discomfort and uncomfortability, but also the willingness to go there. The fruit of that is enrichment and awakeness, and it's a gift. And I feel very blessed to listen to both of you share, and it's enriched me. And so thank you for sharing and for your vulnerability and your honesty and putting your authentic self on the table. Grateful for that. And appreciate you both.
Thank you both. It's good to be here.
It's been fun and interesting.
Always is, right? Always fun and interesting.
Hey, thanks for hanging with us at the same table, a Deepwater Church podcast. To learn more about who we are, where we are, resources we offer, and ways to get involved, go to deepwaterchurch.com. The Same Table podcast is produced by Matthew Thomas and Deb Wong. Technical production by Sam Prime, with special assistance from Jeff Fifield. Drop us a note if you have any questions, encouraging words, or something you'd like to learn more about at info@deepwaterchurch.com.